So you've hit a few crypto airdrops. Maybe you just got Dimension, maybe you got Manta, and maybe you're expecting to get a few more in the future, like Starknet or Wormhole. And the question a lot of people have been asking is, what should you do when you get an airdrop? Should you hold it or should you sell it? So we're gonna break that down in this video. Now, there's no right answer to this, but I'm gonna walk you through my framework for thinking about this and for making a decision in each case, because each token is completely different. Now, I have talked a lot on this channel about the airdrop snowball, which is the concept of receiving an airdrop and then rolling over the proceeds from that to farm more airdrops, and this way continuing to grow the amount of capital that you have, farming larger and larger airdrops until you finally reach a point where you have made enough from this that you can walk away or just focus on other things. But the concept of the airdrop snowball doesn't mean that you have to keep 100% of each airdrop that you get. And in some cases, you're gonna want to sell some of that and roll the proceeds over into farming different airdrops. In other cases, you're definitely gonna wanna keep at least most of the airdrop and then use it, stake it, lock it up, yield farm with it in order to farm airdrops that way. So there's a few different approaches. Now, I have made this simple little decision tree on Canva. Don't judge me for the graphics because I am not a graphic designer. But let's break it down now. When should you actually sell the airdrops that you get? The first question that's the most important to ask yourself when you receive an airdrop is, do you have to sell it? If you live in a jurisdiction where receiving an airdrop has some complex tax implications where you're forced to sell it, or if you actually just need the money, for example, you need to cover your living expenses, you need to pay rent or something, then obviously just sell the airdrop. There's no shame in that. You have to cash out sometimes. And taking profits when you receive airdrops is really the only way that you can actually lock in that money. If you keep it invested in different cryptocurrencies and farming different airdrops, at some point it's possible that this whole beautiful Ponzi that we're all working on just comes crashing down around us. Now, on the taxes point, I know that there's some jurisdictions where airdrops are considered as normal income and some cases where it's considered as investment income. And of course, there's some jurisdictions where there's no taxes at all on this type of thing. And it completely depends on your situation. So you need to make sure that you understand the tax implications of receiving airdrops. And if you do have to sell it, just sell it. Now, if you do not have to sell an airdrop because you've got your taxes covered with other money and you don't need to use it to cover your living expenses, the next question that's important to ask is, does the token actually have utility? And when we're talking about utility, this could be things like staking, but there's other forms of utility, for example, voting on governance, participating in a DAO. In some cases, if you have a token, it gives you access to different memberships or different perks. So there's different forms that the utility could actually take. Now, if the token does have some sort of utility, you have to also ask yourself, is that utility going to lead to more money in the future, more airdrops or high yield, so that you can use this to keep building up your snowball? If the answer to this question is no, if the utility is pointless somehow, or it's just for fun, or it gives you access to things that aren't going to bring you further monetary benefit, then honestly, I think the best approach is to just immediately sell that airdrop. There's no point really in holding it. However, if this utility is going to lead to future dollars somehow, then there's a more interesting and nuanced approach that you can take. So in my opinion, if you can stake the token or lock it up or yield farm it to either receive more airdrops in the future or a high yield that's going to help you grow your snowball, then I think it actually makes sense to keep a large portion of the airdrop and keep your snowball growing. And a good example of this is the Dimension token, which was dropped last week. So with this, I have not sold any of it. I'm actually holding all of it and rolling it over into staking to try and farm more airdrops. But also by staking, you get a yield in the Dimension tokens itself. So it's a 2-for-1 that way. However, I also do think that it's completely reasonable to keep some and sell some. And the percentage allocation is going to depend on your own individual needs, but also the different opportunities that you see in the market. Because if you don't need this money to pay for your living expenses or to cover tax obligations, then you could sell some of it if you see another opportunity somewhere to farm an airdrop or to earn a yield that's maybe under-farmed or where you think it's going to be more capital efficient. Because sometimes we're faced with decisions where if you stake Dimension tokens, you earn a yield on that, but you could potentially earn additional airdrops. However, if you see another opportunity somewhere in a different market, maybe on a different blockchain, could be Solana, could be Ethereum. If you see an opportunity to sell some of those tokens and then to use the proceeds to earn a higher yield or to be more capital efficient, then it totally makes sense to sell some of the allocation and to reallocate the money that way. And I think a good example of this, for me personally anyways, is the alt layer or the alt token drop that we got a couple of weeks ago. So I've gotten a couple allocations for this, for using Eigenlayer and also for staking Celestia. And I'm not going to be holding 100% of it. I think when I get my TIA allocation from this, I'm going to sell it and then use the proceeds to do other stuff. But I'm also going to wait until the alt layer staking platform comes online, and I'm going to use some of the tokens I receive to stake. I don't think that the opportunity for holding and staking alt tokens is nearly as good as Dimension tokens. And so in that case, I think I'm going to sell probably at least half of it and then reallocate. And this part of the decision tree is where you have to use a little bit of judgment, and there's no right answer realistically. And nobody really knows how lucrative is it going to be to stake Dimension tokens and to receive additional airdrops. If we don't end up receiving any airdrops from Dimension tokens, would it have been better to actually just sell it and then move on to the next thing? Well, maybe not, because the Dimension token also has the narrative of stake to earn airdrops, which is driving the price of the token up. So if you sold it immediately on the first day, then you would actually be probably pretty sad. So let's move back up the decision tree then and move over to the next part, because if the token has no utility, then there's still a couple of decisions that we can make. So if we go from do we have to sell? No. And does the token have utility? No. Then the next question I think that's important to ask is, does the token have a good narrative that is going to increase the price to drive the price up over time? If the answer to that question is no, then definitely just sell everything immediately and move on to the next one. Now, a good example of this one could be maybe the Jito token drop from last year, because as soon as people got it, if you sold it, you could have received $10,000, 5 figures in profit. But if you held on to it, there's not really all that much utility. You can use it in some DeFi on Solana, but realistically, the best play with that one was to sell immediately and to roll the proceeds over into farming other airdrops. Now, of course, in hindsight, it's easy to say that, especially since we can look at the price chart and see how it's come down from the peak right after the airdrop. But in the moment, you don't necessarily always know, is the narrative good? Is the price going to go up? It's tough to tell. And so the other part of this branch of the decision tree is, yes, the token does have a good narrative. Or we could also actually add in maybe, because it's not always cut and dry. So if the answer to this question is yes or maybe, then I think the smart play is to sell some immediately, and the percentage allocation is totally your judgment call, and it depends on how good you think the narrative is. If it's a questionable maybe, then the best approach is probably to sell most of what you receive in the airdrop and move it into other things. If it's a yes, a strong yes, the narrative for the token is very strong and you think it has a good future, then you probably want to sell less of your allocation and hold on to a larger bag. Now, for me, I think a good example of yes is the Arbitrum airdrop that I received last year. This is a token that doesn't really have all that much utility, but Arbitrum is the largest Ethereum layer 2 in terms of total value logged and in terms of trading volume and DeFi applications. And so the token itself theoretically does have a good chance of going up because of that narrative, because of being at this point the leading ETH L2. And so I did not sell all of my allocation immediately. I held on to a decent chunk of that, and I sold a portion of it and then used that to keep farming other airdrops. Another reasonable approach to take on this branch of the decision tree, I think, is to dollar cost average out, dollar cost average sell a position. So let's say you got the Arbitrum airdrop. You like it for the future, but you want to use some of that money to fund other pursuits. Well, you could start selling a little bit over time and then slowly exit your position until you reached the final allocation that you wanted to have. And I think if the narrative is very strong, you probably want to hold at least 25% or even more, maybe 50%. Again, it's your judgment call. But if it's a super strong narrative, you're going to want to hold a decent percentage of the airdrop long-term as a moon bag. If it's a weaker narrative, maybe you're only going to keep 10, 15%, and you're going to sell the rest. And then how fast you sell it is also going to be determined by how strong you think the narrative is. Because maybe you want to wait and see what happens to the token price for a couple of months after the drop. If that's the case, then slowly selling your position, maybe a little bit at a time every week until you reach your allocation, is a better approach. However, if you think it's a week maybe, then you probably want to sell maybe like 50% in day one and then average down until you reach 10, 15% if you think it's less of a strong narrative. Again, so this is all obviously a gray area and there's no right answer, but I think this is a pretty reasonable decision tree. And this is what I personally use to figure out whether or not I should sell an airdrop or hold on to it when I receive it, and then what I should do with the proceeds. So hopefully you guys found this little video helpful. A lot of people have been asking for it down in the comments section, and I thought I would bring you my strategy. But of course, everyone is going to have a completely different opinion on this, and I'm curious to hear what you think. Do you agree with this decision tree? Is there anywhere where you would diverge or different decisions that you think should be inserted in here? Let me know down below, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.